Parker in Kapaa, Hawaii. Is that right?
Yes. Hey, Matt. How you doing?
Good.
And Martin.
How are you?
My question is more for Matt, mainly because I've heard you talk more about this than anybody else on the show, and that is creationism and teaching of creationism in the schools specifically.
Actually, my objection is to teaching them in science class. I'm fine if creationism is covered in a comparative religions course.
Right, I've heard that. Now, so my question is this: why not allow them or teachers to show that as an alternative, quote, solution in the classroom in a way? Because first of all, what are they really going to say about it? It's only going to be talked about for what? Some people have this belief that God created and it's outside the system. And if anything, it's just going to provoke a discussion, going to reveal creationism for what it is, which is untrue. Why not allow that to occur in that context?
Yeah, for the same reason that we don't also want to include that some people think it's turtles all the way down, or that because we have a limited amount of time to convey information to students, and we don't need to waste it on every crackpot religious or otherwise idea that's out there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a general premise that science class should be for science. I mean, you've probably been seeing some headlines in the news lately on social media about how creationists, answers in Genesis, they've all got their little panties in a twist because they want equal time on Cosmos. Darn it. But it's like, well, Cosmos is a science show. It's not a science and every other superstition, alternative explanation for things in the world show. It's a science show. It gives you the scientific explanations. Are there other explanations that are pseudoscientific or not scientific or just plain, bat poop? Yeah, well, indeed there are. But again, we have a 1-hour program, just like you have 1 hour in biology class, and you deal with the curriculum.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about gravity, should we spend time explaining that there are people out there who think angels hold your feet to the ground?
Yeah.
I mean,
now, having said that, I do recall being in high school in my biology class in 10th grade, and our teacher at that time did have a brief mention of creationism. I don't know if it was part of the lesson plan or anything, but he mentioned it, and he did it in such a way, like you were saying, that it just made it sound stupid, right? He just came out and said, well, they're creationists, they just don't believe anything evolved from anything, that everything just popped here in the way it was. And since we had just gone over 6 weeks of going through biological processes, just compared to that, it immediately sounded stupid. But there's another factor that you have to take into account too, which is that you can't just assume all high school and grade school level science teachers are scientifically minded. There are a great many creationists, flat out 6,000-year Earth creationists.
Who don't even teach evolution if it's in the existing curriculum, and then now you want to let them go ahead and talk about creationism, and you're going to trust that they're going to do it in such a way.
They are in the teaching faculty of schools teaching science classes right now. People with openly non-scientific and anti-scientific attitudes are teaching science classes. So you're going to get creationist teachers who will not do, as you say, present the alternate theory in a way that allows students to naturally come to the conclusion that it's all myth and ridiculousness. No, they're going to be evangelizing.
Yeah, but look, let me get a word in edgewise here.
Okay.
The point is this: I think kids today, at least some kids, not so much everywhere in the country, but in the better school systems, they have an inquisitive nature, they have intelligence, they're capable of entertaining ideas and discussing them in a way in which knowledge can be ascertained and they can learn. So why not let them bat around this one idea? And I see what you're saying, Matt, but I've heard you say this many times, but they're not introducing ideas that something else created. Creationism is a pretty specific set of ideas, and since it is a predominant thing in the world today, or at least in this country, allow the students to entertain that just enough to get some intelligence interjected into it and get some. I understand that some of the teachers may present it in a way that is more favorable, but why not allow those discussions to happen in a natural way? That's my only. There is there is a benefit to looking at alternative theories.
It's not a theory.
Yeah.
We do not waste time in science class talking about every alternative speculative hypothesis. We don't even do it in history class. And when we're talking about, the moon landing, should the history teacher get in there and go through and debunk all the people who say that the moon landings are a hoax? I mean, do we waste class time on that?
I think the short answer...
To me, the whole thing is a waste of time anyway, so why not?
I think the short answer to your question is, yes, it's a good idea for those discussions to take place. science class shouldn't be the venue for it. There are other venues that are more appropriate for it. I think outside the school,
what do you drop from the current curriculum in order to make time for this?
Students who have creationist parents who are going to public school learning science are still getting huge doses of creationism at home. I think that in an extracurricular forum is the place to have those discussions and to let the kids think for themselves, but just not
the solution is to do a much better job of teaching both the methodology of science and the facts about evolution, so that when they are presented with creationist nonsense outside of the classroom, they are inoculated.
They're better equipped to have the tools to...
Look, here's another, that science itself does not have to be taught in an isolated way. Maybe science flows into philosophy, which flows into other topics as well. Maybe it could be discussed even with a bit of intelligence interjected. This whole idea of, because I heard a thing you were talking about recently where somebody was about, this was a long time ago, but talking about how he hasn't seen any evidence of anything created that was not created by an intelligence, at least something that was complex. Now that's actually an interesting topic to discuss. Why not let the kids hear that discussion and develop their minds instead of just being fed, oh, here's what the science says, here's what... Let them think a little.
What do you think is actually being taught? I mean, because it's possible to teach these concepts and explain about the explanation for complexity, the diversity of life, etc., without talking about creationism.
I think it's an interesting idea. As an atheist, I think it's still an interesting idea that you could speculate and just talk. It doesn't mean you're showing it as science, but speculate.
What do you drop from the existing curriculum to make time for this, let's sit around and speculate about science hour?
Yeah, I mean, science class is for the teaching of science.
I just think it could be a...
You don't have to drop anything?
5 minutes, 2 minutes.
You want to spend 2 minutes on this? You're calling to argue that we should spend 2 minutes on creationism in science classroom.
I'm calling to say that I don't think we should be afraid of ideas just because they are, quote, non-scientific.
But it's not about that. I agree with you that the open discussion of ideas is the best way to get people to, and especially students and children, to develop their own thinking on those ideas. But the purpose of science class is to teach science. And those discussions are better had in a different venue.
I think that's kind of a dogmatic view of the classroom itself.
Not any more than it's dogmatic to think that geometry class is for the purpose of teaching geometry. It's not any more dogmatic to think that the purpose of physical education is to exercise the students and not have them sitting around on sofas.
In a classroom, is that what you're saying?
I'm sorry?
I mean, that's a narrow
I'm sorry, wait, I didn't hear what you... The purpose of...
I said we can never cross boundaries from one teaching subject to another in the classroom. That's a bit narrow in itself.
But that's what the classes are for, though. Especially in a grade school and high school level, pre-college. The whole idea is to give students the grounding in these ideas. Okay, so math classes for math, history you teach history, that sort of thing. And then when you're perhaps in a different environment, when you're an adult, when you're in college, when you are in church groups and discussion groups and things like that, that is when you take the basic knowledge that you get and you develop your ideas from there. But when you're talking about 12, 13, 14-year-old kids, that's the stage of your education when you're just getting the basics.
You know what I would like to see? I would like to see school systems designed to open minds and get people thinking, filling their minds with figures that they're going to repeat back ad nauseum, and they're not really going to be able to have critical thinking.
Yeah,
I'm talking about a type of classroom that was in
and for years, my position has repeatedly been to teach kids how to think and not what to think. I'm not arguing on behalf of science class should be a recitation of facts. How dare you try to make it seem like that's my position? That's not remotely my position.
Seemed to be what Martin was just implying.
No, what I was implying was that classes have subjects, and the purpose of an education in a particular subject is to teach the subject.
I mean,
Okay.
my
that's-
algebra teacher told jokes.
And this whole idea of then allowing students to develop their ideas and then expand upon in a more advanced way their thinking on the subject, you can't have those conversations until you at least have a grasp of the basics. Otherwise, what are you talking about? You have a bunch of ignorant people who don't know what they're talking about, spouting opinions that have no merit. You have to ground someone in the basics of the subject before they're even
Martin, I
equipped to
didn't
discuss.
suggest that the classroom be just a free-for-all and just, let's talk about anything we want in non-scientific. Of course not.
Okay.
You still want to teach science, but I'm saying give it some latitude. Allow some ebb and flow in the thinking process to develop the creativity in the mind of the student. That's all I'm suggesting. And I think that if we did allow that, even with respect to creationism, much better and fuller type of system. I don't think it's anything to be afraid of. That's my whole point. I don't think we should be afraid of nonsensical ideas making their way into a classroom.
Sure. If you don't, then you are not sufficiently conversant with the reality of what's going on in science classrooms. If you think, now, as a matter of being able to discuss things and demonstrate why it's scientific or even unscientific, I'm right there with you. Really good idea. The reality is, even in places where evolution is supposed to be taught as part of the curriculum, you have teachers who won't do it. You have no good reason to think that creationism, if you allow it in at all, is going to be taught in 2 minutes in a way that belittles it and shows that it's not science. What you've done is you want to change the law about teaching creationism and science, and you're just, optimistic that everything's going to turn out okay, that the teachers are actually going to teach this reasonably? You know how many horrible science teachers there are who reject evolution on the whole and don't teach it even though they're supposed to? Where does your optimism come from?
We can't control the quality of educators that we have in the system, at least not in that way. They're either going to be open-minded.
Which right away
makes your idea a bad one.
Which right away is the argument against the merit of your idea. Everything you're bringing up is essentially sort of a recapitulation of what we've heard many, many times from the creationist community when they ask for equal time. But when I remember being when people were testifying about 10 years ago to the State Board of Education about, should ID, intelligent design, and creationism be part of the curriculum in this way? And one of the scientists essentially said, here's what you're essentially advocating, here's why it's problematic. You're basically saying, let's introduce a whole bunch of additional ideas into the discussion with students, but then we want to immediately tell the students, but those ideas are wrong. But those ideas are just what other people believe, and they're not accurate. Well, at that really, when you're still at the basis of introducing fundamental concepts, that just adds a bunch of confusion into things. I mean, you're already going to get bad ideas, in life. School, at least primary school, should be about a grounding in the fundamentals, and then from there, once you have a grasp of the fundamentals, then when you know what you're talking about, you can have discussion. And I agree with you, discussion of ideas is the best way to treat ideas. But but you have to have the ideas first, the basics first. And school science classes isn't where those discussions need to be happening.
And we've reached the end of the show, so thanks a lot for the call. I appreciate it. We got to let you go.